Welcome back to HANA Basics for Developers. Now at this point, I think we've learned enough about Node.js basics and how it interacts with the database and reuses the UAA service that we're ready to loop back and take a deeper look at XSA application level security. Now, if you remember back to the very beginning of this series when we created our project, we did create a UAA instance and defined our security architecture in our xs-security.json. Really, since then, we haven't done much with our security. We've really only been using authentication, that the user had to be an authenticated user, but we haven't done any more specific security checks at the application server level. We haven't checked for scopes or attributes. We've only done database level security. And what we'd like to do now is go back into our project and retrofit some of that security into the project and see how it all works together at the application server level. So let's return to our project in the Web IDE. And let's do just a little bit of a refresher here. If you remember, as I said, way back at the very beginning, the very first one of the very first videos, when we created our project, before we built anything or ran anything, we added this xs-security.json file. And I said in this xs-security.json file, we were building the blueprint of our security. We were defining the possible scopes, the different types of actions that we might want to check for instance, display, create, edit, delete. And we were adding the attributes. For instance, we added session client or country attributes. And then we combine them together into role templates. And when we created our UAA, remember what we did there? We went over to the XS Advanced Cockpit and we drilled into our space. And we had created an instance of our XS UAA, or Authorization and Trust Management. And during the process of creating a new instance, which here is our instance, but when we were going through that process, the second step, we uploaded the xs-security.json. And that told the UAA what possible roles and scopes that our application would be using. But we kind of stopped at that point. We didn't go any further in the setup of those roles. And in fact, if I go to our application now, let's just back up a little bit here. And let's look at our deployed application. For instance, we look at the Node.js or the XSJS. It doesn't matter which one we choose. When we look at the security on our particular application, we see that we have no roles. There are scopes defined because they are coming from that UAA. It's defined the create, delete, display, edit scopes. We can see that the attributes client and country are defined as part of our application, and that our role templates exist, but none of it has been configured into a role yet. So if there's no role for our application, there's nothing that can be assigned to my user. The other thing we haven't done is we haven't really wired any of these roles or attributes into our application itself. This xs-security.json and the UAA just sets up the definition of the security. We still are responsible for going into our code or our other development artifacts and requiring certain scopes and attributes. So let me show you what I did here. I retrofitted some of the things that we've already developed. For instance, I went back to the HDB XSJS that we developed earlier in the XSJS. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to put the scope check in for display mode. And all you have to do from XSJS is use the check against $session has app privilege, and then you check for any of the application privileges that you defined here in your xs-security.json. So they're called scopes here in xs-security.json, but for backwards compatibility, we used to call them application privileges in XS Classic. So we didn't change the name of the API, but we automatically mapped through to the new concept. So I'm saying display here, and that just corresponds to the display scope that we've defined in our xs-security.json. So now our code, if I were to try to run this HDB XSJS again, let's just come over here and try to run this HDB XSJS. When I run this now, I get not authorized. And I get that not authorized. That's the error message that I'm sending back because I failed this check, this programmatic check. Because remember, I don't have the role created yet. I don't have it assigned to my user, so I don't pass the security check. But now I've added this scope specific check to this particular piece of code, this XSJS piece of code. Now, likewise, I can also add scope checks in XSODATA. This is nice because we're not even having to do any coding. We can basically just take our scopes and attach them to certain operations. For instance, in this OData service, I've said for the entire service, in order to do any kind of read operation, I need the display scope. Likewise, for create, update, delete, and debug, I need these different scopes. And once again, I'm just taking the scopes as they're defined here in the xs-security.json. These are not predefined. They're not built into the system. You define which scopes your application needs. You define what you want to call them. I just happen to match up to pretty basic names here of display, create, edit, delete. But that's what you're matching up with here. And I could also put these scopes on individual entities as well. But I wanted both entities to be covered by the same scope. But I could, if I wanted to, I could have a different security for displaying the header as opposed to the item. That's totally within your control. But now that I've added these scopes to my XSOData, now when I go try to run that XSOData, and purchase, which one did I put this on? I put it on purchase order. So if I try to run purchase order.xsodata and go to the PO header, I now get error 403, forbidden request. Okay, so the security is being checked automatically by the XSOData framework, and I'm not having to do any additional coding there. But once again, I failed the check because I don't have that security on my user yet. All right, the last thing I want to show you, or actually second to last thing I want to show you, is that in XSJS, we can also, in Node.js, in pure Node.js, we can do a similar check. But what you see here is I've added another event handler here called example1. And what I want to do is you just define a scope you want to check for. So I'll take the XS-app name, and this is the actual scope name, .display. So once again, I'm getting the scope name from the xs-security.json. And then I'll do a similar check here if request auth info check scope for this scope fails, or if there is no auth info at all, which means I don't have a security token, because this auth info object, similar to our database object, is being initialized automatically for us thanks to the middleware that we plugged into Express. That's why we had to load our UAA information and pass it into Express via Passport. Well, that makes this auth info available to us, and then auth info has this check scope function that SAP has provided. It's going to check for the display scope, and if I don't have that scope, then it's going to return an error message forbidden. Okay, we can also, I just want to show you, remember in addition to scopes, we also had attributes, client and country. So we can also code for those either at the database level or, as you'll see, at the at the Node.js level. They're here in this auth info as well, but we can check for those. At the database level, it's just going to append XS underscore onto the front of them, and they'll be placed in the session context. But let's go ahead and run this example one just to show you here. So now when I run ex2 example 1, I'm getting forbidden. All right, and that is coming. That's my custom error message here that I'm sending back with the 403. I'm getting this forbidden. So I've checked in code for this. Likewise, let's look at this user info 2. and I'm selecting from the database, and of course we're seeing our current user and our session user, our external application user, but our country and client are null. They're not being populated because they're not part of our user info because we don't have the role assigned to us once again. But in a minute here, once we create the role and assign it to our user, you're going to see how all these applications change, and I'll have access and I'll be able to see this information. One last thing I want to show you here is I actually had to wait for the end to show you this one. You can, of course, programmatically check for all of these things, as we've done in these various examples. But actually, most of the time, we can just do it in our xs-app.json. And what will happen here is we can assign these same scopes directly to certain routes in our xs-security.json, in our xs-app.json. And then the app router, the web module, will check them automatically for us, even before we drop into processing our XSJS or Node.js. So it won't even go to that level. It will stop processing before we get there. And I've done this. I've gone in, I've extended the XS-app.json, I've added scopes based upon the HTTP verb. So whatever HTTP verb it's receiving, get, post, put, delete, it's going to check for certain scopes and automatically reject anything that doesn't match up. Now, I haven't ran the web module yet because all my other tests would have been caught by the app router, and we wouldn't even be able to see our specific error messages if I had reran this. But at this point, I'm going to rerun the web module so it picks up these changes, and you'll see then security will be applied to my entire application. Every path in the application will be checked now. And actually, you notice when I made that change, it came back too fast. And this is one thing that is a little thing that I've noticed here. Sometimes when you change the XS-app.json on the web module, it doesn't pick up the change properly. Because I think if let's go ahead and let's test that. Let me come here to my just go Node EX2. No, actually it did. It did pick up the change. Sometimes it does not properly pick up the change, and then what you would have to do if it didn't, you'd have to stop the web application and do a start, and that would force a complete rebuild. But it looks as though we've just improved the Delta mechanism there, that it can now inject changes to the XS-app.json as well. That's really good. But now what you're seeing is every service that I call, even my most basic Node service, even if I, well, not the index HTML because I didn't put that in the route, but if I go to just Node EX2 or just plain Node or any of our XSJS services, they are all being stopped with forbidden, and that's because they're being stopped at the application router. And they're being stopped by this web module with this configuration that I just added here. Okay, so that's all fine and good, but now we want to give our user access. So what we need to do is we need to complete the security configuration part of this. So let's go back over to the XS Advanced Cockpit, and now we need to create roles for this UAA. Now, from the command line, you can create a role just from the reference of the UAA. But if you're going to use the XS Advanced Cockpit, you actually have to go in through an application that is bound to. And it's a little difference in the navigation. If we didn't already have a running service, we'd probably want to go to the command line and do this with the create role command. But because we have a running application that is bound to it, we can just go ahead and say new role. And then from here, let's just call this editor EX300. And videos editor 300, and you'll see we have the two templates, editor and viewer. So we don't directly assign scopes to our roles, we only assign role templates. So I'm going to take the editor role template, and then what I have here is I can assign values to these attributes. Now there's two different ways to do this. In most customer production systems, what we'd recommend is that you'd probably want to get this information from an external identity provider, in which case you would say identity provider, and then you wouldn't put the actual attribute value here, but just a path where you would find it in the SAML, and then it will pull the value in dynamically. Now, my system is not connected up to an external identity provider. I'm running locally against the HANA user store, so I'm going to have to use static values. And this works okay if you really only have like a small number of values to assign. But if you know, if I had many different values, like if I was going to assign many different countries, I would actually have to create separate roles for each value assignment, and that could get a bit cumbersome. So I'm going to say I'm in country US and I belong to client 300. I'll go ahead and save that. Oh, I got an error. I think I know what error I just got. Let me just try this real quick again. Yes. So I have encountered an error that hopefully none of you will see in your system. I saw this in the notes. I'm running an internal build of the XSA runtime, and there was a bug that slipped into our internal build that did not allow the creation of roles from the XS Advanced Cockpit. That's okay because I'm going to switch to the command line and do the command from there. And actually, this is to show you the other option to be able to do this. So just 1 second here while I get that. All right, so I've opened my command line prompt here, just the DOS prompt, and I'm going to issue my login command. So we haven't really seen the XS command line in the videos. I tend to stay with the web-based approach, but we do have command line capabilities, and we can do most every command from here as well. And you'll notice what I'm going to do here. I'm logged in now. I'm in my same space. I'm in my development space. So I'm going to issue the command XS and then create role, and then I have to tell it the UA instance name, and then the role template name, and then the role name that I want to create, and then I have to pass in any attribute values in a JSON string. That's what I had to go prepare, is just formatting it into the JSON string. So what you see here is I've issued the command, and then it asks, yes, I hit enter a little too soon there because you know it wants me to reissue the password for XS admin. That's the user I'm logged in as. And just because I'm creating a role, this is a security feature. It wants to make sure that I reissue the password. It has now created the role. Now let me get the command for the editor role as well. There we are. And it has created that role. Now, although we hit a little bug there because I am running an internal build of the XSA runtime, it was actually not a horrible thing because it allowed me to also show you how you can do the same process from the command line as well. And if I come back here to the web, fingers crossed, yes, now I can see that those two roles have been created. I can do the rest of the process, hopefully from the web user interface. So we have the roles created, we have the values assigned. I think now maybe I'm pushing my luck here to actually go into edit mode, but yes, you can see the values being assigned here. The client 300, the country US. Now what we want to do is we want to assign these to a role collection, and then either assign that row collection to our user or use a row collection that is already assigned to our user. And that's what I'm going to do here. I already have a row collection that is assigned to my user ID. It's the one that I use for web IDE development. I'm kind of lumping a lot of stuff into this, but this is my local private system. I don't need super tight security. Obviously, if this was a real system, even a development system, I would create a new role collection and I would assign these roles to that separate row collection. I'm going to go ahead here and just cheat a little bit and assign these roles to the existing role collection. So I'll just come here and find my group 00, assign my editor, and we're going to be a powerful user. We're going to have both display and edit capabilities, so that's fine. Now I'm a viewer, and just to prove to you that this this role collection web ID admin is assigned to my user workshop 00, we can verify that. If I come to user management, I can see that my user workshop 00 has the web ID admin role collection. All right. Now the only thing that we want to do here is sometimes authorization, security tokens, they get cached in the web browser. So to make sure that we picked up all of our changes here, I'm going to go ahead and completely close out of Chrome, and then I will relaunch it. And let's log back in. There we are. And same project, no changes to the project, but now let's start testing again. So let me open my web and let's just see if now we can get past the app router. If I go Node, there we are. I'm not getting forbidden anymore, so that means I'm passing the web the web module app router checks that we added to the xs-app.json, and I'm getting forwarded onto either my XSJS or my or my Node.js modules. So now let's check. Well, let's work backwards in the order that I showed them to you here. We looked at what this HTTP XSJS. So let's test that one next. Let's just come here and say XSJS, HTTP XSJS. Now I no longer get the forbidden message. I have the scope that it's checking for. So I pass this check. So now it's doing the query and returning the data. Let's look at the purchase order, XSODATA as well. So XSODATA, purchase order. Yep, this is the one that gave us the security failure earlier. Now we pass and we can view our data. Okay, that's looking really good there. So we've passed our app router test, we've passed our XSJS, our XSODATA. Now let's come here and look at our custom check in Node.js. We called it example 1. This is the one that we did not pass the scope check before on. So Node ex2, example 1, and now we pass our check and we see the data coming back. And likewise, let's come here and look at this user info 2, where we're doing the select in the database and we're able to see the XS client and XS country. Now that we have the role assigned to us, we should, yes, and we see that we have US and we have client 300. And actually it's coming from both of the roles, so we're getting an array of values. But now these are the values, because they're available in the database at the session context level. They could be included in your database queries, or they could be included in your structured privileges and analytic privileges, if you remember back to when we talked about the database level security. Now I want to do just a little bit more here actually. I'm going to, when I close down my browser, I lost my snippets as well, but I want to go over here and grab another snippet for you. So let's extend our module. 5db9.js, and I want to show you what all we can get from here. So let's add some more stuff here. This auth info that we have in the request object, we're using it in the scope check, but actually it's a really rich set of information. And remember, this is getting filled thanks to Express once again, but it's all made possible because if we go back to our server.js, remember we initialized our connection to the UAA and we created this passport object, but then we took passport and we put it inside of Express as a middleware, just like we connected our HANA databases middleware. And that's what's parsing all this information and making it available. That's what's processing the security token that's being forwarded on to us. We don't have to directly interact with that security token and parse it, but we can get access to it. In the simplest form, we can do these checks. Let me show you here what all good information is inside there. So let's just restart our module. There we are. And now let's run this one. And notice there's all kinds of good information in here. We have the low-level security token. We have our client ID. We know what XS UAA we are connected to. If we needed to call the UAA, we have a URL to redirect into the UAA. We'll see more of that in a minute if we want to generate our own tokens. You know, some of this is more technical information. Of course, here we can get our login name. If I maintained it in my user master, a first name and a last name as well. This is where we can get the email address of the current user. We can get all their scopes. You know, if you didn't want to just do the provided API, we can also, you know, just get a list of all the scopes and maybe do more complex checks. We can see the user attributes. Maybe you don't want to check for just a particular user attribute, but you want to scan over all the user attributes. Or you don't want to do it at the database level, so you don't check the XS. You don't check the session context, but you can get it here from the security information that's passed in. And of course, there's a lot of more technical information that's part of the JSON Web Token that I've never had a need to go into or play around with, but it is here in the security token as well. Okay. Now, building on top of that, this security token is available in part because the web module is going to the UAA, getting a security token for us, and injecting it into our module, our Node.js module. And then, of course, we have Passport being integrated into Express, and it's filling this auth info for us. But what happens if you don't have all those surrounding helper capabilities? What happens if you would need to build the token on your own? And that's possible. I mean, we talked about how nice it is that the web module does that work for you, so you don't have to do the processing inside your own application. But sometimes maybe you need to. You know, particularly if I need to generate a token to maybe call another service within the same application. We'll see some examples of that later, actually. But I want to show you the process here where we could programmatically get access to this. So what we see here in this logic is, yes, we're going to need the environment, but also we have this helper module xs-sec, so xs-security. And it's going to help us with the processing of tokens when we need to manually process them ourselves. And what you see here is we're going to build a little structure, and you know, some of the information is still coming from the request object, but what we want to do here is write a little function that will allow us to build the access token itself. And what's going to happen is that access token is in the header. If we came through the web module, it has put it in the header. It begins with bearer, and then space, and then the actual token. So we can extract the raw bearer token out of the header, and this is the logic to do that. And then what we can do is, using this XS-security module, we can give it the raw access token, and we can give it the instance of our bound UAA service, and it will build the security context object for us. And that's really what that middleware was doing for us when it filled the auth info. But if you ever don't have access to that middleware, if you're not running inside of Express, if you don't want to plug Passport in Express, you can do the process yourself, as you see here with these lines of code. So let's go ahead and see the execution here and look at the security context that gets built. Basically, we're pulling the security context scopes out. So let's just test this real quick. And what we see, we've extracted the scope information, but, and you might say, well, but we had that before. But remember that before it was coming from the auth info on the request object that was provided by the middleware that's plugged into Express. Here we've built the entire thing using the XS security module from the raw access token and the bound UA service. So not relying on Express or the middleware to provide that to us, but retrieving it ourselves. But it also should help you appreciate how nice the fact is that this middleware exists and can be plugged into Express, because it basically takes all these lines of code that you would have to do in your own application and does it all for you. So I hope that this has helped. I know that the authorization concepts are at the XS advanced level are pretty new to everybody, can seem a little overwhelming and a bit complex at first, but I hope we've broken this down in a nice manner and given you a better view of how it all works, and most of all, I hope everybody walks away with a better comfort level and appreciation for just how powerful the amount of security controls that we have at this level are.